They said the law was holy, carved in stone and blessed by heaven. But if you leaned close to the walls of a medieval prison at night, you would hear something else entirely. Thin cries swallowed by damp stone, prayers whispered by children who did not yet understand why the world had already decided their fate. In the flicker of torchlight, justice did not look noble. It looked cold, patient, and hungry. The girls who were dragged into medieval prisons rarely entered through grand gates. Most were pushed through side doors, hands bound with rough rope, feet slipping on mud and refuse. Reminder bells rang in the towns above, but no bell announced their arrival. Some were accused of theft no greater than a loaf of bread. Others were taken because a neighbor spoke their name with suspicion, because their family owed a debt, or because they had no one powerful enough to protect them. Childhood ended at the threshold. Once the iron door closed, they became prisoners first and girls second. Inside, the prison was less a place of punishment than a place of forgetting. Light entered only in narrow cuts, turning dust into floating ghosts. The air smelled of rot, sweat, and old fear. Cells were not divided by age or mercy. Young girls were kept alongside hardened criminals, debtors, and the sick. Straw on the floor was rarely changed, crawling with insects that bit and burrowed into skin already bruised by chains. Nights were long, and the darkness felt alive, pressing close, breathing with them. Hunger arrived quickly. Food was not a right but a favor, sometimes dependent on whether a family could pay or a guard felt generous. Thin broth, black bread hard as stone, scraps that had already passed through other hands. This was survival. For growing bodies, hunger did more than ache. It hollowed cheeks, weakened legs, blurred thoughts. Girls learned to sip water slowly, to chew nothing as if it were something, to dream of meals they once hated at home. Time inside these walls did not move like time outside. Days blurred together, marked only by the opening of a door or the sound of someone being taken away. Some girls waited weeks without knowing their crime or sentence. Others were told they would be questioned. Soon! A word that stretched into months. Fear grew in the waiting. Every footstep in the corridor could mean release, punishment, or something worse. Not knowing became its own torment. Illness spread easily. Cold stones pulled warmth from small bodies, and coughs echoed endlessly. A fever could be a death sentence. There were no healers for prisoners like these, only prayers and the hope that youth might be enough. Some girls survived by caring for one another, sharing scraps, whispering stories of home, braiding each other's hair with trembling fingers to remember who they were before iron and judgment claimed them. Yet the deepest wound was not hunger or cold. It was the lesson that the law did not see them as children. In court records, they were names on parchment, charges written in ink that outlasted their lives. Their voices were rarely heard. Confessions were demanded, not sought, and silence was often treated as guilt. Even when innocence was clear, mercy was unpredictable. Justice depended on mood, money, and power, not truth. Some girls were eventually released, pushed back into the world thinner, quieter, older than their years. Others disappeared into the prison's memory, buried not always in earth, but in ledgers and silence. The towns moved on, markets reopened, festivals returned. The prison remained, patient and waiting, ready to teach the next child the same cruel lesson, that in medieval justice, suffering was not a failure of the system, it was part of its design. By the time the door finally opened for many of them, hope had already learned to walk with a limp. Freedom, when it came, felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. The sky seemed too wide after years of stone ceilings. Sounds were too loud, colors too sharp. Girls who stepped out carried invisible chains with them, habits learned in captivity, flinching at raised voices, counting footsteps, eating quickly as if food might vanish. The world expected them to return to normal, but nothing about them was untouched. Those who remained inside faced a slower, quieter erasure. As seasons passed, their names faded from memory. New prisoners arrived, pushing the old stories deeper into the walls. The girls learned the language of survival, when to speak, when to be silent, how to make themselves small. Childhood memories softened and then blurred. Faces of mothers and sisters became harder to recall. In their place grew a constant alertness, a watchfulness that never slept. Justice, when it finally arrived, was often brutal in its simplicity. A short hearing, a sentence spoken without ceremony, a decision already made before the girl was brought forward. There were no speeches about mercy, no concern for age. Punishment was delivered as proof that order still ruled the world. And yet, order built on suffering did not heal society. It only taught it how to look away. What history often records as law and punishment, these girls experienced as abandonment. They were not monsters, witches, or hardened criminals. They were children caught in a system that valued authority over compassion. Their pain was quiet, easy to ignore, easy to justify. That is why it lasted so long. Today, the stones of those prisons still stand in many places, worn smooth by time. Visitors admire the architecture, the thick walls, the heavy doors. Few pause to imagine the small hands that once touched those stones in fear, or the young voices that whispered prayers into the dark. Medieval justice called itself righteous, but its darkest secret is written not in laws, but in the lives it quietly broke, and in the young girls who paid the price long before they ever understood what justice was supposed to mean. Long after the gates closed behind them, the girls learned that survival inside medieval prisons was not only about enduring pain, but about reshaping the soul. Each day demanded a careful balance between obedience and invisibility. To draw attention was dangerous, yet to disappear completely was to risk being forgotten when names were called. They watched guards closely, learning moods the way farmers read weather, sensing when cruelty would be casual and when it would be deliberate. Punishment was unpredictable. Sometimes it followed rules written in law, more often it followed rumor, fear, or convenience. A girl could be punished for speaking, for not speaking, for crying, or for failing to cry convincingly enough. Solitary confinement was not a cell of silence, but of echoing thoughts. Darkness pressed in until time dissolved. For young minds still forming, isolation was not discipline, it was fracture. Some emerged quieter, others broken in ways no one knew how to name. Interrogations were especially feared. They were called questioning, as if truth gently surfaced when asked. In reality, questions came with pressure, exhaustion, and threats. Girls were told that confession would bring mercy, that resistance would only worsen their fate. Many confessed to things they barely understood, hoping honesty, or the performance of it, might open a door. Justice, satisfied with words on parchment, rarely questioned how those words were obtained. Even religion, meant to comfort, could become a tool of control. Sermons reminded prisoners that suffering purified the soul, that pain was proof of divine attention. For children raised to trust faith, this was deeply confusing. If God was watching, why did he remain silent? Some clung tighter to prayer, whispering through cracked lips. Others felt faith slip away, replaced by a quiet anger they dared not speak. Friendships formed in whispers and shared glances. Older prisoners sometimes shielded the youngest when they could, offering advice or a place to sit closer to warmth. These small acts of kindness mattered more than they seemed. In a world designed to strip identity, being seen as a person was an act of resistance. Yet even bonds carried risk. Loss was constant. A girl you spoke to yesterday might be gone tomorrow, taken to court, transferred, or dead from illness no one treated in time. For those who survived long enough to face release, freedom came without healing. There were no apologies, no explanations, no support. Released girls returned to villages that had already judged them. Prison marked them more deeply than chains ever could. Neighbors whispered. Employers turned them away. Marriage prospects vanished. In a society that valued purity and obedience, imprisonment, even unjust, was a permanent stain. Some tried to speak of what they had endured. Few listened. Their stories made people uncomfortable, challenged the idea that the law was fair and sacred. It was easier to believe the girls deserved what happened to them. Silence became another prison, built not of stone, but of disbelief. Many learned to bury their memories, carrying them quietly into adulthood, where they surfaced in sleepless nights and sudden fear. Those who never left were slowly erased. Records mention them briefly, if at all. A name, an accusation, a sentence. No description of the child behind the ink. Death inside prison was rarely dramatic. It came as fever, weakness, or simply giving up. Bodies were removed quickly. Space was needed. Life continued. The system did not pause to mourn. What made medieval justice especially cruel was not only its punishments, but its certainty. It believed itself right. It did not question whether children should be treated differently, whether mercy strengthened society, or whether fear truly created order. Authority was preserved at all costs, even if those costs were paid by the smallest and least powerful. Centuries later, historians pieced together fragments, court rolls, prison accounts, marginal notes. Between the lines, a different story emerges. One not of heroic lawmen or righteous punishment, but of ordinary cruelty normalized by tradition. Young girls did not fall through the cracks of justice. They were placed there deliberately, sacrificed to maintain an image of control. The tragedy is not only what was done, but how easily it was accepted. Communities knew children were imprisoned. They heard rumors, saw girls taken away. Yet life demanded attention elsewhere: harvests, wars, survival. In that way, injustice thrived not just through cruelty, but through indifference. The suffering of these girls rarely changed laws in their lifetime. Reform came slowly, dragged forward by centuries of pain. But their experiences remain a warning. When justice forgets humanity, when power values order over compassion, it always finds its victims among the weakest. The stones of medieval prisons still stand as silent witnesses. They cannot speak, but history can, if we listen closely enough. Behind every law carved into parchment was a child who felt its weight. Remembering them does not change the past, but it challenges the future. Their suffering was not inevitable. It was chosen. And that is the darkest secret of medieval justice. It was never blind. It simply chose not to see the children standing before it.